Working with layers in Illustrator, like I said before, is, as I see it, is really sort of more an organizational tool. Obviously, you can create effects with layering in a similar way you can with Photoshop and InDesign, but I personally primarily use it more, again, like I said, as an organizational tool. And you'll see here in this file, what happens a lot is this is a working file for a company that creates beer can labels. What they do is it's like a shrink wrap sleeve. I think I talked about it earlier in the semester. But it's basically a flat sleeve. It's a flat print. It's like on a plasticky shrink wrap material. So they print it flat like this, and then they glue it together, and then they drop them on the cans, and then they heat the cans, and they shrink, and they look pretty. They look almost like they're printed on the can. Some are better than others. Some companies do it better than others. But anyway, so what they do is they first print white, and then they print your print, your colors, whatever, on top of that. And then they have all sorts of crazy guidelines, and all their stuff is in metric. So you can see they have this, like, here, this 5mm clear area, because that's where the glue goes. And then they have 2mm on each side that you have to have this clear space to account for the glue and all the technical stuff they need to do there. So they have this template set up, and when you get this template, it's essentially not like that. This is solid blue, but it's essentially this to show you, and then they have your layer 6 is blank. But they essentially have this set up and these locked so that you can't really mess with them. And then again, the white layer you'll see. So this has, here, let's go through. So we have here the die is basically what cuts it. It's kind of like a die is basically like a giant cookie cutter. And it's usually with attached to some kind of press to cut through material, so it just punches the material out. So they have their die line or the cut line on one layer, and then you'll see as we arrow down here, there's just the one path. And then they have their dimension layer that show you all the fun stuff they need to show you. And this is essentially what they call the center, where the majority of your what they would consider, I know it's a round object, but or cylindrical object, but they would consider this sort of the center of your can. So they have that for you, and then any other important information here, and then you'll see as we arrow down, you'll see all of the different. This layer is a little bit crazier because you see all the different. Trying to target and select some of the stuff. There we go. You'll see as you target select, as we have before, you can still target select all the stuff. But this layer is a little bit crazier because it's got all these different dimensions and different labels on their own individual layer. Then we have our white layer, and in this case, it's knocked out. The white layer in general is usually just this solid kind of blue, just to indicate color, because obviously having it white you wouldn't see it. So in this case, what we wanted is everywhere there was this knockout, we wanted the can to show through, to have like a silver, so like the chrome parts of the van look chrome and the window looked kind of mirrored and all that fun stuff. So that was kind of fun to figure out. Let's figure out what I needed to have white underneath it and where stuff overlapped, because we had some of the informational boxes and some of the window here and some of the wheel here, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of fun to play around with and figure out what I needed to do. And for this, I actually used our Pathfinder tool that we've been using, I think this past assignment and the assignment before. So I was basically using the van shape and this white shape and other shapes to cut out using our Pathfinder, so that's where that comes in super handy. And then you have your artwork layer, which is technically underneath all of the stuff in their file. So when you're kind of working, you can shut this off. And that's more what it's going to look like. So anywhere, like we had this white is actually going to be white underneath. And then where that little H piece underneath here. That's going to remain Chrome, so that's why it's knocked out, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see it helps you to really keep files organized and create your art as I was gonna say efficiently, but that's not the right word, but as sort of organized as possible. And I know it's like file saving too, like naming the way you have files organized with different types of layers. Like I could have put a whole bunch of these on different layers within the sub layer and all this fun stuff, but I didn't really feel like doing that. And they're not gonna mess around with that anyway. So a lot of times when you have when you're using this for organizing, it's a lot like file naming. If other people are going to be using these things, it's probably best to name your files to something that would make sense to other people, right? But if it's something that only you're going to be looking at, like sometimes people don't name like any of this stuff, and which I don't think I did here as we go through this layer. There's just group, clip, group, rectangle, rectangle, group, group, group. So you see I just kind of didn't name anything, which I could have, but since I'm the only one really messing around with this, I really didn't feel like it. And you can see as we turn off a lot of this stuff, like here, trying to turn out, there we go. So this is a compound path that we cut out again, so that you would have that knockout for the can, et cetera, et cetera. So again, all relatively familiar stuff that we've been, and I missed a layer, that we've been working with this semester. I just kind of wanted to show you sort of more organized file, relatively organized file, to show you an actual practical application for these kinds of things. So we'll get into, so here's a little bit more of a simplified version of this, but you basically see the same thing. We have our foreground in this room illustration, our empty room, and as we arrow down, there we go. We have a whole bunch of paths. Again, not a whole lot named. And you'll see just paths and paths and paths and paths to create this sort of living room look. And it's clipped out as well. You'll see we have our clipping mask as we go over. It's kind of hard to see, but as you hover over the floor there, you can see we have a little bit extra. You can see that blue line on the bottom left. So we have this behind the clipping mask, so we can copy and paste behind that mask to get things in place as we did in the last masking assignment. If you want to grab this foreground layer, so we have these two groups. If you want to get more organized, let's get into, we have these two layers here. So let's say we have this group and it's going into our living room. To rename a layer or a group or anything in your layers, you can simply click. You kind of have to be like on top of the word here. You can kind of click right here and just type. I'm going to double click here. Couch. And to create, which we'll get into, we'll go on this layer here. So let's say we wanted to bring this couch into our living room layer. I'm going to cut it. So I just did our edit cut like we do with our mask. And then I'm going to look for the this is where things could be a little bit more organized. I'm just going to grab this topmost, which is this doorknob apparently, this topmost object, and I'm going to do a paste in front. I'm going to do the drop down, paste in front. Oh, no, I wanted it behind the clipping mask. So let's get it behind that clip group. We'll bring that down. So let's select our clipping mask. Oh, I thought the clipping mask was around the whole thing. Okay, let's go back to here. I'm going to cut this again. Now I'm going to select our clipping path, and I'll paste behind that. And you'll see now we have our table is behind this clipping mask, but it's also behind this wall here, which is in sort of an odd placement. And you'll see when you select this, so with a sort of messier, I guess, disorganized file, you see where naming your paths can kind of help a lot. So in here, I'm going to call this right wall, and we can select it, and then you have the target button and the selection indicator will light up so that you know where it is. And what we can do is either drag or cut and paste. In this case, I tend to prefer to cut and paste, just because dragging, I mean, not that it's that hard, but you know, again, when you have all these layers and you kind of hover towards the bottom, you'll see we're kind of moving down. It can be kind of a pain, and it can be kind of unruly. And now we're showing why we need to organize our files even more, because now, there we go. Let's get this clip group here. Let's get this clipping mask up higher. There we go. Not perfect, but you get the idea. So now our clipping mask is all the way to the top. And then we can move our right wall behind the table. And now we have our table is a little bit more, I was going to say realistic, but it's not exactly realistic. But it's not behind this wall as it shouldn't be. And then you can see we have this object here. I'm not going to go through like every single one, but to reorganize this layer, you can put these behind the clipping group. You can also bring this clipping group forward ahead of everything else if you wanted to, or in a different layer altogether. To create new layers, like let's say we wanted, for argument's sake, a furniture layer, you can hover down here and you'll see this sort of page-looking icon. It's on just about, I shouldn't say everything, but it's a fairly common icon for creating a new something in Illustrator. They use, in Adobe, they use that a lot to create a new layer, to create a new swatch, or sometimes a new brush, whatever. So we're going to just click that once, and you can see up here now we have our layer 3. And you can call this, I don't even know if I spelled that right. I don't think I did. I'm not going to worry about it. So if you wanted your furniture on a separate layer, we can cut, select the layer that we want it to be in. I'm just going to do a paste in front, even though there's nothing in there, just to keep it in place. Well, let's go back to our table. In our empty room, select our table, cut, get into our furniture layer here, select the couch, paste the table behind the couch, and then, so now we have all these fun furniture pieces. I'm not going to do all these, but you get the idea. We'll grab this cabinet, and I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste behind this table, and give or take, we'll throw the cabinet about there. And we'll throw a very advanced TV. I'm going to select the table, paste it in front, or the cabinet rather. So we give it a little bit of dimension, etc., etc. So creating a new layer, organizing within your layer, is as simple as, let's say you had if you didn't do the paste in front and back kind of thing, you have, I don't know, this plant, for example. Just did a quick copy. I'm just going to paste in general. Oops, yep. So instead of having, let's say you wanted this plant behind the cabinet and the TV and stuff, you can do, honestly, what I tend to do a lot is the cut and paste in front and back, because it kind of helps. I feel personally it helps me keep a little bit more organized. Or again, if you have a layer that's not so unruly, you can grab your layer and hold the mouse and drag it to where you want it to be. If you want it to sort of tuck behind this stuff. So you have your plant sort of behind the behind that cabinet there. Things like that, and then you can throw another clipping path around this to clip out these extras as we have before. I wanted to go over, so in our empty room, you can also lock layers. So let's say we're going to start organizing this a little bit more, so it's not just pads and random shapes, but I don't want to select these by accident, so I can do a drag and select. So instead of, let's lock this clipping group as well. So we're going to lock the clipping group. You can, I know we've talked about this, toggle visibility and toggle locking and unlocking by clicking that little area to lock it and unlock. So now, if we drag and select, oops, I locked the wrong one. If we drag and select, now we're not going to select that background or that clipping mask. We're just going to be able to select what we want to select here. So let's say we wanted to make this a little bit more organized, right? We'll take this object. I thought that was behind that clip group, but it's not. So I'm going to select this back wall. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle my, you can either select this and lock it, which might be easier for you. Or if you don't feel like locking it, what you can do is select first, and then sort of starting in your free space, I'll hold down Shift first, and then I'll just kind of do a drag to select my doors here. And what it'll do is, since I'm holding Shift, it'll automatically deselect what was already selected and then select what you're kind of dragging over. And then what I kind of do is I tend to just move stuff to make sure that I didn't forget anything. And then I'll just undo that move to put it back in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these. So under Object, Group. And now, there we go. So now we have our group here that we can rename Doors. So now instead of having path, 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 rectangle, rectangle, shape, shape, path, path, path. Now we at least have this group that we renamed Doors. And once you group an object, it automatically shows up as a sort of drop-down organized group, kind of like a sub-layer within a layer. And then you'll see you have your path, 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 path that create the doors. So that you don't necessarily have to rename all of these if you don't want to. You can just group them and name them. Or group them and name that group rather. So we have here again this closet, I think. So I'm going to go to Object, Group. I'm guessing that's a closet. So now we have these objects. So now if we move them, even if you want to move them into, for whatever reason, let's say we want to move this into the furniture layer, you can drag and drop into that furniture layer, and now it's there to organize within this furniture layer here. And we have our closet. You want to put it behind everything else. So now it's behind. It's in our furniture layer, and it's behind everything, so the visual looks relatively okay, except now it's in front of the floor, which is a little weird, but you get the idea. So you can create groups, rename them, drag and drop them to organize your layers. There's defaults that happen with Illustrator as you create new layers. You'll see you get a little bit of a color indicator next to them. And what that does, it's a visual that will help you, when you select the objects, the color of the bounding box will change and will relate to these colors, which is sort of a helpful visual cue. You can also change that. So you'll see as we select through, something on the furniture layer is green, something on our room layer, we have that default light blue. Our foreground layer, if I can select something, if there's nothing in the foreground layer to select, but if this was in our foreground layer, now the bounding box is red. So it's just like a handy visual cue to kind of also keep yourself organized. You can also go into, when you have your layer selected, you can click your contextual menu, and I'm looking for, you have new layers to create, stuff down here as well. New layer, new sublayer. You can delete the layers, your options. You can use your layer to create clipping masks. Isolation mode, which I do all the time, and I turn it off actually in my preferences, will allow you to, I think if you triple click on an object, it'll isolate that object so you aren't able to select any other objects, but it kind of grays out the rest of your workspace. I know a bunch of you guys have done that by accident, which I do all the time, which is why I turn it off. You can locate objects. You can flatten your artwork, which works differently than Photoshop. It kind of just like puts everything on one layer. You can collect, if you select a bunch of different things, you can collect a series of objects and collect them into a new layer. Make a template layer, et cetera, et cetera. So we have options. Oops, stuff keeps opening in my other window. So you have your layer options, which used to be called layer properties. So if you guys are looking for layer properties and can't find it, it's layer options. So you see here, you can rename the layer here instead of double clicking on the name here. You can select a color if you wanted a custom color for your layer. You have the colored pencil, spectrum, swatches, sliders, etc. to select new colors. That's going to make me pick a color. Let's go to yellow. Close. You can also do this drop down, and it has a whole bunch of colors to select from. And I believe by default when you create new layers, I think it just does it in this order, this sort of like default order. So as you get into a bazillion layers, you can have a layer go all the way down to dark blue. But you can change this if you would like to. So we'll hit OK. So now our foreground layer is going to be yellow, so that just changes that visual. You can make a layer a template layer if you wanted to. For example, this is the last I'll show you with this. You have your layer 5. If you wanted to use something as a template layer, let's place. I have to go through my chapter 5. Let's place a realistic living room. So here is our sort of realistic living room. So let's say, for argument's sake, this is placed about where we want it. And we're going to use this as a template to place these objects within this room, right? So we have our layer 5, which is our living room original. So we're going to go to, if you double click, not on top of the name, if you double click sort of an emptier space on your layer, it brings up your layer options as well. And what you can do is you can click template, and it gets rid of, or it doesn't allow changes for the rest of this stuff. And you can dim images. So let's dim images. We'll make it 25%. And then I'm hitting tab. And then we'll hit OK. And what that automatically does, these are kind of gross colors, so it doesn't exactly work great. I feel there's a lot of pink. Let's go to 10%. Still not great, but you get the idea. So what that'll allow you to do is to dim the image and allow you to be able to place these objects. And it automatically creates a template layer, and it automatically locks anything that's in that layer. So you can use it, theoretically, as a template to place all these objects that we had. And you can dim the images so that you can kind of sort of see through them, but not really. You can also play around with the opacity if you wanted to, let's say, not make this a template layer. So now it's going to be here. And another way to do that is if you played with the opacity of this. There's our appearance. If you played around with the opacity of this image, so we drop that down to about 25-ish. And then go back to our layers, and now we can lock this layer. And it essentially does the same thing, so now we can use that as a template. But you can create that template layer, and usually you move it to the bottom. But now you have, you can see you have this another layer we can use to sort of organize. Another way we can organize our files and use an actual image to either trace or, in this case, to place objects around, et cetera, et cetera. Another handy thing which I do all the time, and this is actually part of one of the assignments, is previewing for clients. What I'll do a lot is, let's say, for argument's sake, this is a logo for Xanadu Hair Cutters. So let's say we have the Xanadu part. Let's say you wanted to create a bunch of different font options for your clients. You can create, we're going to create a new layer, and I'm going to select the Xanadu part. I'm going to copy, and then in our layer 2 here, I'm going to paste in front, so it, oh, or not. Oh, because I already had it selected. Sorry. I'm going to deselect. Now I'm going to select the layer here, and I'm going to do a paste in front, so it stays in place, but it also places on the new layer. You can see it has the red bounding box, and now we can change the font. I'm just going to randomly grab a font, and again, another new layer. I'm going to deselect so I don't actually paste in front of that object. I'm going to paste in front in this blank layer here, and I'm going to change the font to something else random. All right, and then as you can see, so we have our original, and if we wanted to create another new layer and move this Xanadu onto this layer here, so now you can create options for clients. I know this is sort of quick and dirty, but you get the idea. Options for clients to show them a variety of either font choices or different design choices. And you can either, what I tend to do honestly a lot is I'll take screenshots and send them. So on, I'm not sure what it is on a PC, but I know on a Mac, if you do Command-Shift-4, yeah, Command-Shift-4, it gives you this little target, and you can just kind of highlight. I'm not going to do it, but you can just highlight what you want to show. You can also export, which a lot of people do. So if you have your layers set up like this, and then again, I'm not going to do it quite yet, but export, and you can do export as, and you can export it as a JPEG or another flat object, and you can use the artboard and it will only export what's on the artboard. So you can export or take a screenshot, show the next one, export, take a screenshot, hide, show the next one, export, take a screenshot, or even if you're just working with a client directly, which I do a lot, I'll just have my laptop open and we'll just go through and be like, you like this one? Nope. Okay, how about this one? No. It's a little bit like an optometrist. But this is another handy way to use layers to give a client a variety of different looks with a particular object or option. I'll use that a lot where I'll have a bunch of different layers, again, sort of like this, to go through to give client options, even with different colors. You know, if you wanted to have, honestly, a different scissor, this doesn't really read as hair cutting scissors to me. That's like kitchen shears, or I think of like cutting construction paper. So let's say you wanted to have a different, which is not, but let's say you wanted to have a different set of scissors, or even have this, you know, these two paths. You can duplicate. You can either copy and paste. Oh, that's another thing. Lastly, you can copy and paste, or you can duplicate objects. It should hopefully work. There you go. By dragging over that new layer button, and if you just drag objects over it, it doesn't create new layers, but it will duplicate, or rather, it doesn't duplicate the entire layer. It just duplicates what you have selected. So let's say, for argument's sake, you wanted to select these two guys. Then we're going to use our eyedropper and select that. Even though the shape isn't exactly right, that reads maybe a little bit more like, not really, but a little bit more like hair cutting shears. And again, you can throw those on a different layer to keep them more organized if you wanted to give your client options. But that's a more practical application if you're working with a logo or something like this for a specific client, for a specific purpose, to be able to show them different options just by having things on different layers and turning them on and off, and being able to organize your layers that way.